Hi, welcome to the podcast number 5. Our guest today is Zahid Lilani. He is born and raised in Karachi, and after that, he went to Silicon Valley. He did his undergraduate from San Francisco State University in accounting. And after that, he has worked at a number of startups, including Uber. And he is a researcher he researches on Pakistan's startup ecosystem, especially the investment rounds. He also writes about those things on Medium, and he has a newsletter on Substack. Other than writing about startup ecosystem, he also writes about stock market investments. He has a newsletter, I believe, with the name of dividend.fun. He will talk about that in detail. So with that, I'm really looking forward to diving deeply into the startup ecosystem because he has got a lot of research and I'm really excited. Welcome to the show, Zahid Lilani.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amir, for having me. And yeah, I'm glad we could coordinate, we could discuss this topic. This is my first time actually talking about this topic with anyone on a podcast. So yeah, I'm excited. Let's see how this goes.
Yeah, I'm honored and pleasure is all mine. Before I ask my first question, let me just say one thing that, in every podcast, I try to, make a note that I have to mention how I found the guest, sort of mention the trail. And today I want to say that, Kamil Rexton is a friend of mine from Pakistan. He saw my first podcast and he was very, excited to help me find a lot of guests. And he tweeted a few names, including Zahid Lilani, and there was Adil Maan and John Nash, Nash as well. And as you know, I've already done Nash's interview, and it will be live in a day or two. And the format is, we record a podcast and we put it up within a week. It mostly takes us 5 to 7 days. So a big shout out to Kamil. I believe his second name is Rexton.
Yes.
You can correct me on that. So yeah. So let's.
Yeah. So Kamil and I go, and I think if I recall correctly, I have had a conversation with him where we spoke on the phone or Skype, I think, and it was about Pakistani startups. This was a long time ago. I'm not sure if he remembers or, but yeah, we have been communicating back and forth. So yeah, shout out to him for connecting us, and yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So, I mean, let's start by, talking about you were born and raised in Karachi. So what brought you to the Silicon Valley? Talk a little about that.
So I was born in Karachi, but I never lived in Karachi. So I grew up in Dubai. So yeah, my parents were in Dubai and my mom left. My family lived in Dubai. We visited Pakistan every year, twice a year. And so, yeah, that was back and forth. So last time I was in Pakistan was, I mean, it's been so long, I can't even recall. Maybe it was 2006. So yeah, it's been a while. And so I moved, I was in Dubai, I did my schooling there. And then when time came to study for, undergrad, I decided that it would be, beneficial for my future to take the opportunity and maybe travel abroad to study and basically then come back. Well, long story short, that did not happen. 2002, I came to San Francisco, went to school here, then got married, and then that's where we are here right now. So yeah, so that's been my journey. I blogs and content. I used to buy and sell websites very early on. I would, hire developers. This is back from, even before Upwork and all these other places. I would find developers, I'd create a website and then run it for a little bit, make some money and then sell it. So I've been doing that, but I never got into it to a point where I become become a techie. So I studied accounting. Right now, I do tax. And so, what I've done in my career is try to figure out how I can help startups or any company for that matter. So I really want to help entrepreneurs because I know the issues they have, especially when it comes to, the books, the accounting, the taxes, the compliance. So that's where I, lean towards in my career. And I worked in multiple places, mostly public accounting. As you mentioned early on, I worked at Uber, I worked at First Republic Bank, and now back I'm in public accounting. So throughout my career, I've figured out how I can help in some way or the other with taxes, with compliance stuff, and yeah, so that's basically been my journey. So I wouldn't say necessarily like I cannot connect with people from Pakistan most of the time. That's always been an issue for me, and so that's one of the things that I always like to mention is like when someone puts me on the spot and says, "Oh, Karachi se banda to Karachi se hai, lekin it's mostly from."
Fair enough.
So, so I like people can tell. So Pakistanis think I'm Indian. Indians, of course, think I'm Indian. So that's always been the case. And plus, I'm married to
It's
an Indian. So because of that, it's just always been like, oh, you must be
it's
Indian.
it's it's
So
very
that's been
interesting.
my short journey. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting that the Pakistanis who are abroad, they have like very interesting stories, and it's very interesting that having said all of that, but your one of your key areas of interest is keeping a watch back home, looking at the things in the startup, because it's not like you don't have so much going on in the valley, because and but you still choose to study Pakistani startups. So talk a
So
little about that.
I I blame. I'm pretty sure he's quite known in the circles in the Pakistani ecosystem. Adam Dawood. I read his article. This was really early on, like 2000, maybe 13, 14, something. And I read his article on, I believe it was Mashable, and that's how my journey started. So we communicated back and forth. Of course, I was very naive at the time, and it wasn't that, because for me, it's like, okay, I want to fund startup. So I had, seen people fund startups in the valley, like, $5,000 check, $10,000 check, and you are like, you're an investor right away. So I, of course, was naive enough to think that that's how it's in Pakistan. But of course, it's not like that in Pakistan. And so that's how my journey started. So initially, I was like, okay, how do I get more information about all these startups? So I'm like, okay, I'll do what I am comfortable with, which is start writing about them. So I started writing about them, and then slowly, I have no pleasure in saying this, but I feel it's important to say this. The initial cohort of startups or founders, they were not that great. Most of them were, they were. I would, I really, if I feel like if I say something, you might know who this person is, but I'm trying my best here. But most of those founders were trying to literally figure out how to get into MBA programs abroad. So they're like, okay, how do I get into an MBA program? I'll do a startup. I'll get accepted to Plan 9, and I'll put that on my resume and get admission. So that was the focus. Focus wasn't like, okay, I have to come up with a startup, I'm going to grow it, I'm going to raise funding. That wasn't the focus. So you saw a lot of theatrics, people,
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean,
founders applying to a lot of award shows, showing up in conferences, in random countries. It's like, what are you doing? That's not how you run a startup, right? You focus on the customer or the product. You are going to
yeah,
conferences and applying for grants and all these things. It's like, you really, I mean, you're in the wrong line of work if that's what you
yes.
think startups are.
Yeah, it's very interesting
So
that it's very interesting that you start from there, because I tried to mention this topic to Monas Rahman when he was on the podcast. He sort of brushed it aside. It's okay. This is how it happens in every ecosystem. You evolve over time. I agree to with that, but like in whatever I've studied in the for the past companies in Pakistan, sort of the failure ratio was sort of 100% in the past. Like and there were like a lot of a few of podcasts that we have done. Like there, Asim Fayaz has talked about the mistakes they have done, and then Ali Rehan has talked about the mistakes he has done. Even Nash talked about they gave up 85% of the equity to the investor at Pringate, the Nash of Integrity. I don't know if you know him. So, there were like all
Yeah,
these
yeah.
stories. I'm hearing all these stories. So, like it is how it is that, the way you talk, and I'm glad you start off from that. And, and talk a little about the evolution over time, and is it exactly like that now, or have we learned our lessons and we have really evolved?
Yeah, so what's happened from, of course, when we started. For reference point, 2012 is when things started to take shape in Pakistan. This was because of Plan 9, Plan X, Saf, of course. So he started this, and Mark Khor, I think, was like the first batch from the first batch of Plan 9. Like the biggest Plan 9 story so far. So yes, of course, when things started, you had all these newcomers, people who watched Silicon Valley, how it did things, and thought that this is fun and games. And it turns out that's not how it was. So it's very difficult to run a startup, especially in a country where everyone is hoping that once you get your bachelor's or master's, you go work for a bank or chemical factory or something, right? You're expected to go work for someone else. So the initial cohort of like investors, mentors, founders, there were a few gems in there, and some of them are still around. But for the most part, everyone else has subsided. Like everything is like okay now in terms of like where they wanted to be in life, they are, and people who really wanted to stand out are still around, and you hear about them a lot more now. So starting from 2012, of course, there was dumb money. Like initially, I want to focus more and more on doing this podcast also, because I don't want to speak about things that I don't know much about. So I have been following the money. And initially, I wasn't doing that because I was thinking maybe I'll help founders tell their stories. But then I realized founders are, I'm sorry to say this, but full of shit. So once you realize that they are basically taking you for a ride, and it's not what they're saying is actually not true, I thought, okay, maybe where should I go? Like people who really have a skin in the game. So that becomes investors because they're investing their money, so they have skin in the game. So I thought I would follow them. So because if they have certain insights, if they have opinions about someone, that will be important to understand what they feel about certain founders, because they're putting their money, so they have more access to the founders. So I started following the money trail in terms of like, oh, who's raising funding, and that's where I started documenting. And so what I realized is initially it was really dumb money. So dumb money is basically people like you mentioned, like people would invest in your startup and be like, I will take 51% so that I'm owner. uh, in the US it's 51%. I'm not sure what's in Pakistan, but in 51% basically means you are an owner. And that started happening, and founders started realizing like, okay, they are being ripped off. So there was this really lack of incentive, like to really do something, because you're like, you know what, even if I have like this $1 billion idea, main jaunga paise lene, and I'll realize that this investor wants my like everything, right? Like my idea, my everything. So that started happening. And so unfortunately now, I think starting, I would say 2018, things have just improved drastically. And the reason, I mean, of course, I'm an outsider, so I can only speak to what I saw, and of course, I could be biased. But I feel like Sarmayacar with Rabil, he seemed to have started this. Like, I would, if ever a book is written, I think he would be the one you would mention as to someone who had an investment banking background, moved to Pakistan, and decided that he is going to get other people to invest with him. So everyone had a skin in the game in the success of the startup, and then take things from there, which is like your classic, you start angel investing first, then you raise a fund, and then you invest, which is where he is now. Of course, it was also at the same time, I think, when Sarmayacar announced their fund, I2I Ventures with Kulsum, they also announced the fund. So they were also like operators. So of course, Kulsum does not have investment banking background, but she was an operator. She ran accelerators. She was so close to realities on the ground that there could not be a better person to be doing this. So you got two of the brightest people in the ecosystem, in terms of what their knowledge, what their insights were about the ecosystem. And I think that's where everything started from, and that's where we are now. I'm pretty sure you saw that Pakistan had the best year since people started keeping track in terms of funding. And I think they get a lot of credit, they because they are well traveled, they have networks that are within and outside Pakistan, so that helps get the message out. So when the message gets out, then people start taking notice. And I
Yeah,
think that's
yeah,
been the best part of all this, which is it took a while. So 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, nothing was really happening. 17, 18. And I don't want to get into politics, but it also has a lot to do with changing the narrative about Pakistan. So you had a change in power, like Imran Khan is. I'm sure Imran Khan is has very much. He's very popular in Pakistan. I'm pretty sure, but he's, I would say, 10 times more popular abroad, because I have been to his fundraisers in Fremont and Chandni. So he's the kind of person that us people outside of Pakistan were connected to, because he already had this sort of like a mythic figure, at least because during his cricket days, after he got into politics. So that helped a lot of people feel this renewal of like, okay, there is new energy in Pakistan, Naya Pakistan. So that helped at least change the perception abroad. So people
yeah. I mean,
knew
yeah,
who
yeah.
Imran Khan
I
was.
definitely, definitely your opinion is very important. But I sort of tried to make a conscious decision that this podcast will be sort of apolitical in that we won't talk about it. So I would sort of refrain commenting on it because I want this podcast to be an open place. But definitely, I'm with you. Something has
Sure.
changed. Something has changed since 2018. Things have
Yeah.
started accelerating, and it has. I think it has also a lot to do with the smartphone adoption and the startup ecosystem maturing. And as you talked about, Sarmayacar coming in, eye to eye of Kalsoom Lakhani, and also Indus Ventures is here of Atif Awan, and there are others as well. I mean, I think there
Yeah.
are a few others, Karandas, maybe there's something like that. You would know better,
Yeah.
but especially talking about Sarmayacar.
Are on the top of my head, I can't remember. Lately, they have not been as active as they were. So I can't remember, but they did lead some of the rounds with Indus. Indus was very active last year with Bazaar and AimFit. So yeah, so it's they have Sarmayacar, I think, has like $30 million. That's what they have raised. So they have some time to deploy that capital. That's their fund one. So you will see them getting more active. But yeah, lately I think they have not been as active, unless like they are making investments and not announcing, which is a possibility, which I've always had an issue with. But it's just me. Like it comes to this where you have venture capital firms that are actually, um, they might not be like based in Pakistan per se, because these are funds that invest in Pakistan. They're not technically in Pakistan. But Laxon, I think, is the only company that is incorporated based on a venture capital firm or a private equity firm. So they are solely based in Pakistan. I think other than that, it's 47 Ventures, Carvan, Sarmayacar, I2I Ventures, Indus. They are all based out of Pakistan, but they invest in Pakistani startups. So we are seeing like a lot of smart money, which is what these VC firms are. Even though they're less VC firms, they're more known for their founders. So Sarmayacar, of course, Rabil, and Indus is Atif. I2I Ventures is Kulsum. So it's I think what they are doing is extremely important. And for me, at this point, I want to see an exit. I haven't seen an exit since 2018 of a startup that was acquired. So a funded startup that was acquired, and I think that's going to become a more and more It won't become an issue like in like next couple of years, but 3-4 years from now, it will become an issue if there are no exits, because exits is what keeps the ball rolling. Because Indus, let's just say Indus has an exit with Bazaar, uh, then the new fund that they raised will be bigger than the older fund. So wins, make all the difference. So winning is something that we haven't seen yet, and none of these startups that have raised money from all these smart money VCs have seen any exits. So that will be very interesting to follow to see if
Yeah.
there will be an exit.
Yeah.
But
What was
given yeah.
you talk about, after 2018, we haven't seen an exit. Did we see an exit in 2017 and before that? What was the last
No,
big exit that we have seen? Kareem was an exit, but would you consider it an exit of
no,
Pakistani ecosystem?
no. Kareem was not a Pakistani startup. Kareem was based in Dubai with operations in Pakistan, no doubt, with a Pakistani co-founder, no doubt. Like all these things are facts. But I mean, Kareem's exit was good for the ecosystem because it created quite a few people who now had the freedom to start their own startup. And we are seeing that. I think there are like 15 or 16 startups now, funded, non-funded, that have founders who were previously with Kareem and then left after working there. So I think it's important. I'm not trying to downplay what did happen with Kareem, but Kareem was not an exit for Pakistan. I would say so. I don't even consider Daraz or all these e-commerce and all these other companies. These were like group owned. They were owned by a certain group, and they were not like startups. They were like basically a conglomerate basically trying to own multiple companies in multiple countries. So I wouldn't say it was a startup. uh, so the last, I think it was in 2015. It was a very small, very small in the sense that like the amount wasn't disclosed or anything. The 2018 startup that was acquired was Slide app. It was basically an app that basically showed you ads on the phone, and before it showed you news and all that. So I think it was a Korean company that acquired it, and it was a Korean company also, or an Asian company that invested in it, and it did raise a lot of money. But there's the founder from that startup is not known in the tech circle, so we don't have much information about what really happened. So when I have tried to talk to others about Slide app acquisition, they have said, we don't really know what happened. So it's possible, but the only reason I kept track of that is because you could go to Crunchbase and you could figure it out. Like you could see that they raised money and then they sold a company. So 2018 was it, and I think it was 2015. And between that, if there were any acquisitions, at least like they were not high profile. So I don't know about
So
that.
what is your guess that who would be the next unicorn from all of these startups that are around?
It's very difficult to say right now because we're still like 6 to 7 years away from that point. I think anyone right now doing anything in the payments space, fintech, could be something that would be keep an eye out for. And because because fintech would be I would say that, so there are a lot of banks in Pakistan, right? So eventually, sooner or later, one of these banks will look into these startups and say, you know what, instead of rebuilding, reinventing the wheel, let's just acquire them.
Exactly.
But that is, might not happen for some time. But I think there's a lot of activity in the fintech space. So next, not a $1 billion company, but a quite $100 million company or a $500 million company might be within the fintech space. Right now, of course, there's a lot of activity there.
Who are your who are your top picks in the fintech space? My top two that based on my limited knowledge would be Safepay and probably Finja. Do you like and what's your take on it? I mean, who are in your sort of in your radar?
So yeah, Safepay would be one of them, and I would say the next one would be Be Secure, which is trying to build this really checkout system that's very uniform, and it creates less friction. And I think given how things are, I think that's where everyone is going now, where they want less and less friction to make a purchase online, to make it as easy as possible. I think Be Secure does that. Be Secure has not raised any money, that as far as I know. But once again, it's Adam Dawood who has been in the e-commerce space for quite some time, and he's building it. And I think so far he's been really good at execution. So you really need execution, and I think it's been good to see how his journey has taken him from like different corporate roles to where he is now.
Yeah, it's very interesting because by the way, I haven't heard about Adam Dawood, and I will look him up. And I will be. I had heard about Be Secure, and it's and the reason I mentioned Safepay was because I have made an e-commerce purchase using Safepay, and I found it very convenient, very easy, and it was something about them was very user friendly. I bought an e-commerce, like export leftover. They had their experimental payment there, and I sort of loved it. And I think they are and they are part of YC, and YC when they enroll a company, they really back it up. Markhor was of course major part of their success was YC in my opinion. And it's very interesting when I look at your your work. I read Medium, and I also the Glide app that you've made, really classy work there. Was it Glide, right? Yeah.
Yes, it was Glide. Yeah.
And there I did not see any mention of Integri and the startups that are founded by people who are actually the founders are in the Silicon Valley and the backend teams are in Pakistan. Was it like why don't you consider those? Yeah.
Counting, one of the things that tell you is, or train you for, is be consistent every year. So when I look back, I want to be able to compare my numbers from 2020 to 2018 to 2015. So early on, I decided, which I feel like it might require some tweaking. I decided that I would look into at least one Pakistani founder. So that's always been like my go-to. Like, okay, how do I decide? So when I look at Integri, yes, Integri is I think Nasrullah. So he, of course, was in Pakistan when the company was created and all that. But if you look it up, they say that their HQ is in San Francisco. So that's the reason I don't include Integri. But I think now, after discussing this with certain people and seeing where the consensus is in terms of who should we be including in our lists or in our reports, I think I would consider Integri to be part of that, and I will be making an adjustment at least to my numbers for 2020 very soon. And so Integri is there, and then there are a couple of other startups. There's Retailo. Retailo also raised money last year. I did not include them in my list because they made they made sure that everyone knew that they were headquartered in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. So if there's a company out there that just really wants people to know that they are from Saudi Arabia and not from Pakistan, then who am I to tell them, no, you're not from Saudi Arabia, you're from Pakistan? But then again, I heard that their entire operation or majority of their operation is in Pakistan. So it is a Pakistani company. So those things are, I'm still debating as to which way to lean, but I've decided that if the founder, they're Pakistanis, majority of the company is in Pakistan, and they work from Pakistan most of the time, then it's a Pakistani company. It doesn't matter where they raised money, because they might have raised money or they are headquartered in a certain country because the investor who wanted to fund them said, hey, I won't fund unless you headquarter or you create a company in a certain country. So that could be an issue. That's something that I will be revising my estimates for 2020, and it only increases, right? Like the amount, I was very conservative with my amount, which was 47 million, I think 48 million. So now if you increase it, it only goes up. So it's not that I
Yeah,
included
yeah,
someone who should not be part of it. So it only goes up. But yes, you're right. I should be including them,
yes. There
especially
were
if I
there
know that
are,
the startup was actually founded in Pakistan.
and the Retailio guys, all of them are from Pakistan. Actually, they got their educations from Pakistan, and so like there are like convoys there. There are a couple of enterprise startups, who are in headquartered in Silicon Valley, but they are run by Pakistanis. Some of them have raised money, some have not, but I've become aware over the last few weeks that there are like half a dozen startups like Integri who are working with the model that the founders are in the valley and the entire back end team is in Pakistan. So in Retalio and in some of the startups like Integri, and there are others where we see that now we are looking at we are having founders who are educated and born and raised in Pakistan, as opposed to the previously where most of the founders were educated abroad, and you guys have sort of coined a term for them, Wapistani, and talk a little about the evolution of that term,
Yes. Yeah.
and why were they raising a lot of money, disproportionately a lot of money, and how is it changing now?
So yes, so I think a lot of money that was raised, at least in 2020. I don't know if I could think of 2019, but I think it was a pattern has emerged, and the pattern is, if you are born in Pakistan, educated outside, or even if you went to study abroad and then came back to Pakistan, you have an easier time to raise money. A lot of that is of course true, but it's also a matter of, so I have met a lot of people who traveled from Pakistan. They were in Plan 9. So this is a part I skipped, where I got really involved with or other startups that were traveling to attend conferences or something, or accelerator programs in the valley. So when I met them and I would talk to them, one of the things that they would say is, like, they had a different mindset in Pakistan. And the moment they left Pakistan, came here and mingled with others here, their horizon outside Pakistan is way different. So whatever knowledge that they had, they absorbed whatever they learned, and they went back, and so they became really good at what they were doing. So that's one thing that I could tell right away. And they were visiting from Pakistan for like few weeks, few months maybe, but they were able to get so much. So just imagine someone who is in Pakistan comes to the US, goes to Stanford or Berkeley or all these other universities here, and then gets involved with you know student bodies here, or startups, or accelerators, or incubators here, and then goes back. So he will of course have an edge in raising money, because he can sell himself. And in Pakistan, still, degree matters. Having that kind of background from abroad, or having being polished, still matters. I mean, it matters everywhere. In Pakistan, maybe more so. So you do see a lot more Wapistanis, people who have worked here, and now they have decided to go back to Pakistan, raise have an easier time raising money. And of course, if you also have worked for Kareem or any high growth startup, then it makes it even easier. So that's a pattern that's emerged, and I don't think that's troubling. I think what they are doing is still, yes. If I were to know of a story where two identical startups doing this identical thing, but one founder was Pakistani educated and other founder was educated abroad, and the investors decided to go with the educated abroad one, then there would be an issue. But we don't know if that is actually happening. So it's very easy, so to from an outsider's perspective, to look at all these things and be like, maybe that is happening, but we don't know for sure. But it's a pattern where it's a startup that other investors or other people have heard about.
Okay. So, I mean, the one thing that I wanted to talk to you about was, what are some of the lesser known startups from Pakistan which have a real good potential that that got your attention. Talk a little about those startups which are not at the radar of everyone right now, but they are underground. They are building good products and services.
Uh, One of the startups, I don't know if they have raised money or not. Like I have like three, four. One is, of course, Be Secure that I already talked about. Be Secure, I think it's not funded yet, or if it's funded, it's not disclosed yet. So I think that has a really good future because anything in fintech space is hot, and there is a lot of need, there's a lot of demand, and because of that, the market is huge. So that's very promising. Another one is, I think there's a startup called Udan. Udan is basically it's a digital way to do committees, which is very common in Pakistan. So I think they have few people like as employees, and I don't know if how it makes money, but yeah, I felt that that was a new take, from taking something from physical space to digital. I think that has a lot of potential. Another startup is. They are doing beta right now, so they're not. But people have mentioned it, so I will go ahead and also mention it. It's called SenPi, SenPi, and they are basically Khan Academy on steroids. Not my words, but yeah, that's what they are. And I have seen some of the content that they're put out, and it's amazing. And I think that has a potential, because in India, I mean, culturally speaking, in India, education startups in the past few years have just taken off. Like they, in India especially, it's been, they have not had any hard time raising money. They have had like successful acquisition, etc. So it's been a very hot space in India. I feel that will also happen in Pakistan very soon, especially with COVID. And I think there will be a lot of focus on learning than just by like go to school and get a certificate. So when that happens, I think people who have access to these ed tech apps will have an edge. And so that's one of the startups that I feel that can make a lot of difference and could be successful doing that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, I agree with you on the education and the skill-based courses, and I think it's time that a lot of disruption will happen to the university model. It so happens that I'm teaching a course on mobile app development, and interestingly, there are like 21 students have enrolled, and they have come up. Everybody has a mobile app idea they want to work on. So this is how hot the market is, and the SenPi, that the app education Khan Academy app that you've talked about, startup that you have talked about. Who is their Khan? I'm just curious. Who is their Khan? Who makes that content?
He's someone who was part of Patari before. Yeah, so he's been low key since things happened with Patari and the whole controversy. But yeah, he's I would say like you cannot keep him quiet for long. He's not that kind of person.
Is he the CEO Khalid Bajwa himself?
Yes.
Oh
Yes, of
man.
course. Yeah.
The guy
So
is of course
he, yeah,
talented. The guy is of course talented. He's full of energy, and but what happened was a serious problem, and it was dealt the way it should have been dealt. And Patari, I believe, it had. I read your article about it. It definitely was one of the first startups which had its own sort of attitude, its own sense of humor, beautiful green design, and they were, it was the first startup which sort of made that statement that we are local and we have arrived and we are here to make waves. And but unfortunately, I know they're still not profitable, and but interestingly, they're also funded by Sarmayacar, if I'm not wrong.
yes,
And
I think Sarmayacar, yeah. So initially, I think Rabil was one of the, he was the angel check that went into Patari very early on. So yeah, it is part of Sarmayacar in that way.
yeah, it's very interesting,
Yeah.
like I don't know what the woke culture, or what the sort of, like after how the market will sort of react to that CEO's new startup. I don't know. Time will tell. So, what else do you think is important to talk about when we talk about Pakistan's ecosystem and and the raising and the fundraising and sort of I've sort of decided in sort of give space to the guests and let them add a question or a perspective rather than me asking questions all the time. So this is my first sort of approach like that. What do you think is something that we should talk about when we talk about this topic?
I think what we should be talking about is, I'm not trying to be political here, but there's a lot of complaints right now from startups that things are not moving, as fast as they could, and that's because of bureaucracy. That is everywhere. I think that's the reason entrepreneurship is so exciting, because you take the challenges that you have and then you make something out of it, that you come up with a creative solution to a challenge that others can't see, others can't fathom. So when that happens, that's when startups are born, in the sense that they take off or they come up with something new. So I think it's a constraint, but a lot of work will keep happening in the background. As startup, if you are spending time saying, hey, this was the biggest complaint. I'm talking about 2015, 2016. That's when I met a lot of startups that were coming from Pakistan to attend all these events and seminars and accelerator programs here. What I realized is, like, one of their biggest complaint was, no one wants to fund big ideas. No one is there. There is no. They all want, like, 80% of my company. So that was the complaint. And of course, they were like, well, the government is not funding. So I don't know if you know much about the Israeli ecosystem, startup ecosystem,
Yes.
but there was something that happened that jump started there, because Israel right now is known for having, like, per capita, I think, the most startups in terms of the
They are
money.
the startup nation.
Uh, yeah. So there are certain things happen, and that was brought up by a lot of people that I spoke to, and founders and investors and people who are just part of the ecosystem, who mentioned, like, if we could just get something like that from the government,
And
we would just be in such a better place.
what were those things that Israel did? Talk about that for the audience. What were those important things that Israel did?
So I don't know all the details, but I know this. What Israel did is it created its own fund, for example. So let's just say Sarmayacar or Indus Valley, they come and say, what, we will invest $1 million in a certain startup. So the government fund would also say, we will invest $1 million too. So that's basically that was. So
And
it's
Zahid,
not that.
we have seen in Pakistan how inefficient the government is. I don't trust government to make the best decisions. I think Sarmayacar and Indus Capital and Kalsoom Lakhani, they are the right people to make those decisions, because your money, your decisions. In government, a lot of corruption in Pakistan. I don't trust the government yet. We are not evolved to that level yet.
No, so that's not what the Israeli program was. It was more about when the investor has decided that they will invest their money because they have done their due diligence, before investing the money, they would just go to the government and be like, we are investing, here's the due diligence. Would you like to join us? So basically, a government becomes your own sort of a venture capital fund itself, where it says, you know what, if you are so confident about a startup, we would like to join you. I think that happened early on. I think that's the gist of the whole idea.
Yeah,
And that's
I
how it
think
took off.
dollar matching dollar for the real investors, that can work. If the investors are putting in like 1 million and the government is matching that 1 million, that makes sense. Because
Mhm.
someone is putting their hard-earned money on an idea, and imagine the amount of due diligence that they will do. And I think when the government officials makes
Yeah.
that decision, and they can be some corruption. We see in Pakistan how things work. A
Yeah.
lot more marketing, a lot more performance, but very little substance. And but it's very interesting to talk about all these things. But I mean, I've heard, now in 2020, the problem with Pakistan's venture capital is that there is a lot more money chasing very few startups.
Yes. Yeah. So that's one of the, that's that's a good problem to have, because where you were at, like I was saying, like in 2015, 2016, the complaint was there's no money. Now there's a lot more money, but there are not that many startups. Were there startups in the past? No, I don't think there were startups in the past also. So nothing has changed in terms of startups. Startups are very few. Venture funded startups are a different breed. It's not every business. Every business does not get venture capital money. So you can't expect, like, just because you have a startup, just because you have you took a physical business and you made it a digital business, you enabled, basically tech enabled business. A lot of tech enabled businesses that I met early on, the founders, for them it was like, why is no one funding my company? Because it's a company, it's a small business, which is what we call here. It's a small business, mom and pop. That's what they venture capital does not fund that kind of businesses. Venture capital funds, like, if I can invest $1 million and sell this company for 100 million, 10 years from now, that's what they look for. That's what they're investing. So that's number one to that's the number one thing to understand, that you will not get venture capital money just because you came up with, you had a created tech enabled product. You can only raise venture capital money when you can show the investor that this company that you have built has the potential or the market big enough to become certain thing in the future, to go a certain way in the future. And that's the only way to make sure that you can raise venture capital money. So yeah, that's true. Very few startups right now, a lot of money. And I think founders are in the driving seat right now. So if you have an idea, especially if you are a Wapistani and you are sitting outside Pakistan looking at Pakistan, you're like, okay, I have this idea, I have some experience, I know how to scale a startup. Venture capitals will chase you, and that's a good thing. Like right now, I think founders are in the driving seat, and yeah, so the money should not be an issue right now.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And when you have a startup, and you are a lot of guys, when they do startups, they need a lot of guidance, they need a lot of help. And for that specific purpose, we have incubators and we have accelerators. And based on your experience, are there accelerators in Pakistan? If there are, which of them are really good? Or do you think that having good accelerators is very important for the ecosystem?
Yes, I think in Pakistan, what accelerators have done is basically replaced getting an education from a university over 2 years or 1 year, and replace that with like 6 months or a few weeks. I think you learn a lot more by going to an accelerator than you would, getting an MBA in Pakistan. Plus the network effects, because I'm talking about a good accelerator. I know there are a lot of accelerators in Pakistan. Um, I don't have an opinion about, every single accelerator. I do think the Nest IO is probably the top of the top, and they do an excellent job because of the network that they have, and it's mostly about network. We have a saying here, like, you don't go to Stanford to get education. You go to Stanford to tap in the network. So people need to understand this. Like, just because someone graduated from Stanford and raised money for their stupid idea, that's because the network. It has nothing to do with the education at Stanford. So that's what places like the Nest.io have created, where investors, other founders will help you out with the problems that you are having. And I think that creates a culture which Silicon Valley is known for, which is pay it forward. So you basically help someone today without any expectation that you are helping someone and they'll pay you, or you're helping someone and they'll help you out like tomorrow. You are helping people today so that they will pay it back to you sometime in the future. So I think that's the culture that was created with the Nest.io and other Plan 9 and other incubator accelerator programs. Of course, Invest to Innovate also was very focused. Initially, I'm not sure how they are doing now, but initially their focus was extremely on social startups, where they had a social component to it, which is a niche that they decided to go into. So that for that reason, I think they were not able to take in every single startup that applied, unless they had the startup had a social focus. So, but even their program was amazing. I've heard amazing things about Plan 9, Nest.io, Invest to Innovate, Accelerator program. So all these were like best of the best. And so yeah, if my cousins have asked me if they wanted to ever apply for accelerator programs there in Pakistan, of course I would mention all these three. So that's where you should be going if you really want to learn and grow. But what these programs were back in the day and what they are now is completely different. So I'm pretty sure things improve over time, and there were a lot of complaints with every accelerator program in the past, but I think those things have changed now.
Okay, what would be the standout success story from Nest.io and Plan 9? Because they've been around for a long time, especially Plan 9. Is there a standout success story that they can showcase to the world that this is the output of our years of hard work? Tough
The
questions,
Nest.io,
right?
I can't think of Nest.io. It is a tough question. For Plan 9, I would say,
Markhor is
Markhor,
one,
of course, comes to mind. Yeah, Markhor is one, and
but that
that's
was
a good idea. I could do a complete post on this and do my research on this and see if there were startups that raised more money, or the startup that raised money and how successful they were. I know we have talked about startups and like success and all these things and talking about money, and I don't want anyone to ever think that just because you raised money you will be successful. Raising money is success. Success is having customers is what success is. So yeah, it would be interesting to look into the Nest.io. Nest.io, I think, has startups that I was really recently thinking about this one startup that is very much like Clubhouse. So Clubhouse,
yeah, it's very
it's
popular,
everywhere these days. I
I
don't
had to
have it
talk
because
about it. Yeah, I had to talk
yeah.
about it. Everybody seems to be talking about it in the valley, and on the Twitter. Clubhouse is all the rage. Why is it
Yeah,
that? Why is it that?
because I think what Clubhouse is doing is it's a human nature. It sort of appeals to this human nature. When two smart people are talking, you want to listen into it, right? So that's what Clubhouse is. It's basically two smart people, or two or three smart people talking, and everyone else is listening, and it's spontaneous. Like, you start, I'm going to be live on, and people join. I think that's what Clubhouse is, and that's what makes it, the appeal is so much. And of course, being in Silicon Valley is the best place to launch a startup, no matter what kind of startup, especially if it's a startup that is a social network kind of startup, which needs people, early adopters. So they are right in the right place at the right time. People still work from home, and all over the world also. And the funny thing is, they don't have an Android app. I'm on Android, so I haven't used it, but I can't wait to try it out when it does come out.
Also,
And I have so many ideas of things I can do with that app.
I think
So
there's a long wait list to it. I mean, even if you have an iPhone, you have to wait for someone to invite you. right?
So it's very much like what Facebook was initially, and it's having the same issues that Twitter had initially. So I joined Twitter in 2007. I joined Facebook, before that. So because I was in school at the time, so I could join because the rest of the world couldn't join. So there was this exclusivity which helped fuel the growth, and there's a lot of controversy also about Clubhouse. So I mean, all these things are part of like the things that happen in Silicon Valley in terms of the cycle that goes through. Like you start off, you very few people know about it, and then you raised a ridiculous amount of money at a ridiculous valuation, and people are like, "What's going on?" And everyone looks into you, and then your servers are down, and all these issues. This is very common. This is your typical classic Silicon Valley startup story.
Yeah, I mean, let me make sure that I understand it correctly. So, are you saying that Clubhouse is a kind of podcast kind of thing? Smart people are talking and the other person
Yeah,
listening. How does that work? I mean, are people following some conversations, or are you following a person,
yeah.
or how does that work? I don't completely understand it.
The way it works is so you can follow people, and so whenever they start a conversation on Clubhouse, you will get notified that someone is talking to someone. There are chat rooms, sorry, not chat rooms. There are channels where you could go and see who is going to schedule a talk with someone. So it's a very good component if you're trying to build a community around what you do. So recently Mark Zuckerberg was there, Elon Musk did a Clubhouse, so that of course created this pressure on their servers. And they are this company is like, you cannot hope for a better outcome with how things are going. And this, like I'm saying, they raised I don't know how much they raised, but I think they raised at the evaluation of $1 billion. They don't even have an Android app. So Android has a
It's
lot more
crazy.
people all over the world, right? So it's really crazy that they raise this kind of money and don't even have an Android app yet. And then they're not even inviting everyone on the iPhone or iOS. So I think that Clubhouse, of course, it all remains to be seen what happens in the future. But I think what they have is a product that, like you said, it's a podcast. You will record it, you will publish it. There's a friction. You will edit it before that, and all those things. Clubhouse is more spontaneous. It's live. A lot of things will be said. A lot of things will be, it's like Twitter. Once you tweet it, you cannot edit the tweet. So I think that's the reason it's also been a lot of controversy. People have said things there that they regret it later, or they didn't realize how many people were listening and all those things. So yeah, I think it's an exciting startup. It's a very unique startup, and I think there are a lot of ideas that will come out of it in terms of Clubhouse for X. So yeah, let's see what happens.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I'm just winding this podcast up because we have almost
Yeah,
done an hour. In the Clubhouse, I can see, it's like YouTube. You have the video format where everybody is conscious that how they look, how the background look, and all that preparation that goes into it, and the anxiety. The Clubhouse, when you have the audio, that goes away. And secondly, the bandwidth
yeah,
issue goes away. Much of
yeah,
the world can tune into those conversations without wasting a lot of bandwidth. And thirdly, the most important thing, I think, looks like they have a social element to it, and the discovery will be a lot more built into the system. Because right now, the podcast, the problem is the discovery. There's no social media sort of platform where you can discover the podcast, uh, so when the discovery is not there, the best
yeah,
podcasts don't become popular, and they're not monetizable, and these are conversations that
yeah,
people are having, and in that sense, it can start a lot
yeah.
of new markets.
Yes. So the reason I brought up Clubhouse was because you asked about a startup at the Nest.io that comes to mind that was successful. I mean, nothing outright comes to mind, but the reason I brought up Clubhouse because there was I think what that started, people could hear it. So, for example, if you went to the Golden Gate Bridge, you could record how you felt there, and your friends, if in the future they visit there, they could know, okay, you visited, and this is how you felt, and all those things. So you could just go back in time, and you could just save these little memories or notes. So do that where they would, record as soon as they have a thought. They would record something so that they can talk about it later or write about it later. So it was very unique. So that always comes to my mind. I'm like, checking, right? Check-in. We do Facebook check-in, right? It was more like that. But just imagine, like, with certain kind of trial and error, would they have been able to get to a point where they would be like, you know what, it would be just better if we talk to other people at the same time too. So, but yeah, just that comes to mind that there was a startup very similar to, not very similar, but on the same wavelength of Clubhouse, where it was very audio focused. And I'll look it up. I'll look up the name, and I'll let you know which startup that was.
And I'm really excited to have another podcast sometime in the future, because we will revisit all these themes, and and sort of update the community. And
Yeah.
definitely, thank you very much for taking the time. And I'm really glad we talked about it. And definitely, a lot of people who are listening, they will sort of get a very good summary from someone who has been researching all these things for years. Thank you very much. And
Yeah.
it's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun talking, and of course, listening to myself also. Like, this is my first time talking, so this was really helpful. At least it helps me what I really need to work on in my research, and like knowing certain things, and that really helps in the future. Inshallah, we'll definitely talk again.
Yeah, it's very interesting that, one comment here, the young generation, people of our age, they're very open to be vulnerable on camera. And, it's okay if you don't know
Yeah,
things. If it's okay to be, wrong. It's okay
yeah,
to be sort of in a state where you have to research something, and
yeah,
I just
yeah,
love that. I just love that about, young people, and they're
yeah,
not sort of, fussy about, they're not sort of concerned that you have to look perfect, we have to look knowledgeable, there's nothing that we don't
yeah,
know. So it's
yeah.
a wonderful.
Yeah. And recently I started making videos, so I know how difficult it is, like just to get to that point. And I now understand why YouTube is so big. Like, as long as the content is good, like all these other aesthetics don't really matter in the end.
There's that aspect as well. The people who listen to podcasts, probably, they're not concerned about a lot of visual effect. But interestingly,
Yeah,
in YouTube, if you make the aesthetics and, and the thumbnail and graphics and everything a little better, you get a lot more views. It's like that as well.
yeah,
It's an entirely
yeah.
new world that I am, learning a lot now that I've started my podcast. I've been on YouTube on and off for last 5 years, and I've tried a lot of
Gotcha.
things and they did not work. This is the this is my second channel that is getting some traction. I have a stock market channel as well, which gets a lot of traction, but it's something that is not as close to my heart as the TechStory channel. So I've made a promise to myself, no matter what happens, even there are 5 people who listen to my TechStory podcast, I will continue. I've committed an entire 2021 with it, and I'm happy that, and I'm sure that a lot of people will join, and I'm already getting that feedback from people that, some of the people in a lot of places around the world are listening to those podcasts. However,
Yeah,
in
no, I mean,
minority.
whenever it comes to content, I mean, I have been writing about startups, Pakistani startups, for since 2014, and now in 2020 or 2021, I am getting or people are people know, or people have read about my work, and now when they reach out, like they know like who I am and all those things. A lot of time, takes time for it to catch on. The thing is consistency and staying the course. I, of course, dropped the ball very started in 2014, 15, dropped the ball in 2016, 2017, tried to get back in 2018, and then in 2019 started the newsletter, and now we are here. So it just takes it takes its course. You just have to, because that's what I always tell myself. I would do this. I would do what I do right now because I enjoy it. I love numbers, and I would just do this regardless of anyone was reading or not. So like you said, even if 5 people listen, you would still keep making it, because enjoy the process. And I think
I
that's the
absolutely
best
love
thing
it.
that can
I
happen.
absolutely love it.
Yeah.
I mean, I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
It's my research project. I'm doing it I'm very curious about our tech ecosystem, and of course, I'm doing a small startup myself. I'm so involved, and I wanted to, there was very little written about our tech history. There's still very little written, and the analysis is even, even a lot less. You cannot find those conversations where someone like Monas Rahman or people like yourself, they can, distill years of research in 15 minutes. And, those kind of conversations were not happening. And I was a consumer of those conversations myself, and I saw that it's not happening, and I was very interested myself, so I started it. And I agree with you. The number one thing that is important in life is consistency, and I, like my startup, I run a stock market app, and I do mobile apps, and I've been doing it for like 6 years consistently, and that's when I started to see success, and it's the first time I've seen success, in terms of, that, I've seen year-on-year growth, and that has happened only because of consistency. And the number one quality that I sort of, that number one quality that I think is important for startup is consistency. For the founders is that, and I agree with you on that. So on that note, I'm happy that we had that last 5 minutes sort of squeeze into the podcast as well. So with that, I think I'll say goodbye to you one more time. Have a good time. Have a good weekend, and it's lovely.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was really, really nice talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.